But yeah, so zooming out during these 9 days, we should keep our minds and our hearts focused on the destruction of the temple and what that means for us personally and what that means for the world. Because again, the temple that we're seeking to build, I've said this 1,000 times, and I'm always getting nervous when I say it. I wish I didn't get nervous, but it's not just a Jewish temple. We've been attacked for saying this, but it's just too central and obvious an idea for us to leave out. The prophet Isaiah, Yeshayahu says, Ki beiti beit tefillah yikara l'chol ha'amim. My house is a house of prayer for all nations, that all of the nations of the world will converge upon the Holy Land and offer sacrifices in the third temple. May it be built soon. And that's what we're really praying for, because like Judaism, whatever that word means, the isms that we're trying to get rid of, it's not meant to be this insular religion where we're checking our broccoli incessantly for bugs. And no, it's not bad to check your broccoli for bugs, but not to get lost. Stop looking at each other like that. Anyways, not to get lost in that there's a greater universal mission that we have in the world. So anyways, the Midrash actually expresses this idea really beautifully. It says in Midrash Bamidbar Rabbah, it says, if only the nations of the world would have understood that the Holy Temple protects them, they would have surrounded it with fortresses so that it would never be destroyed. And I really think about that idea all the time. I'm really grateful I found a source for it, because intuitively in my heart, I've always felt that way, that it's one of the greatest sources of sadness I have around the whole issue. Because, I hate tragedies. I mean, that truth is just highlighted about when Jeremy and I were actually arrested on the Temple Mount. I don't know if you remember that, but when I went up, I was saying Kaddish for a family that was murdered. And so what am I saying? Yitgadal, may God's name be great and may peace be spreading throughout the world. And as I'm saying this, I'm surrounded by Arabs that are screaming, death to Jews, death to Jews. And I am arrested, and they put the hand over my mouth to quiet me from, God forbid, praying for peace to the whole world on the Temple Mount. But that's what we're doing. We're not praying for them to die or for our enemies to be wiped out. We're praying for there not to be enemies anymore. But they don't realize that. And their hatred against us is so great. And I hate tragedies. Like Romeo drinking the poison just as Juliet wakes up. Like that whole thing. I don't like tragedies. And this feels like a tragedy. Because with all the hatred and violence and fear and death that culminates in the most contentious 150,000 square, is it 150,000 square meters? I know it's like 40 acres in American measurements. So that's the Temple Mount. And it's the most sensitive spot in the world. You throw a pebble on the Temple Mount and you have a tsunami throughout the nations. And with all that darkness, all the darkness that's coming from the Temple Mount right now, that great mountain will be the greatest source of life and light and peace and love imaginable. And so these days are days in which we're really supposed to look inside, and ask from a real place what the temple means to us. And if we are truly, truly grieved at its loss, and I can't honestly say that I walk around all the time grieved at its loss. And this is a time when I try to nurture and engender that feeling within myself. And let me tell you, it's not easy at all, right? To be grieved over the destruction of a building from over 2,000 years ago that we have no firsthand knowledge of what that was like or what it means. It's not an easy ask. It's not easy. And so Rav Richman, actually, he explains in the name of the sages of Israel throughout history that when the temple was destroyed, the Shekhinah, you guys know what the Shekhinah is? I'm sure Tehila, maybe she's more Kabbalistic than I am. She can understand it better. But it's like the awareness and revelation of God's presence. It's like the female element of, it's a very difficult thing to explain. And I see Jeremy saying something to Tehila right now. But for lack of a better explanation at the moment, the Shekhinah, God's presence in the world, when the temple was destroyed, that Shekhinah was exiled. And that is the root cause of every tragedy throughout history. Because we know, we've talked about it before, we talk about it a lot in this fellowship, and you know what, it's okay. I feel like with family, you hear each other repeat themselves all the time. You see what really matters to them. Jeremy wrote a song about this at my request. Gam zu latova, right? Everything's for the good. But when the temple was destroyed, the funnels of God's light and presence and revealed and Revelation, they became exiled. They became twisted and distorted. And good is now all too often manifested in seeming tragedy and grief and sorrow. And so yesterday there was this horrible accident in Israel. There was this mother with her 5 children that were in the car, and a driver from our cousins. The reason I say from our cousins, the reason I say that it was an Arab driver is because this woman said that this other driver heading the opposite direction swerved into her lane and stayed in her lane going straight at her for a long period. She tried to go right or left to dodge it, but she couldn't. And she got in a head-on collision, killing her 7-year-old son. And she said, this is not a normal accident. This was an intentional thing, which, by the way, makes me think of this week's Torah portion, which talks about when we enter the land, if we let them remain there, there will be thorns in our sides and thorns in our eyes. Kotsim be'einenu. That's what they, and just the murder and the horror that we are facing day in and day out. And this really, like, people are saying it was just a car accident. It clearly was not. But this type of things happened during the 9 days. This is a time of tragedy and sorrow that is the result of the temple being destroyed. And so when we announce Rosh Chodesh, forgive me, I'm going to take a drink. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shakol niyeh bidvaro. And so when we announce on Rosh Chodesh, right, the birth of the new month in synagogue, on the Shabbat before it falls out, we call the month that we're in Menachem Av. That's its official name and title. And the word Menachem means consoling. And the word Av means father. So the month literally means consoling of the father. And while there's a lot of discussion about what this means, and by the way, Jeremy and Tehila, I think I remember last year you sharing an idea with me. If you have it, feel free to interject. But, many say that it means that in the backdrop of the great tragedies throughout all of Jewish history that happened during this month, that our Father in heaven is consoling us, reminding us that he's with us, that he's sort of scolding us with one hand and consoling us with the other. But for some reason, I always read those words Menachem Av as like a directive, right? It's like an order, an instruction, right? Menachem Av meaning console the father, console your Abba. That this is the month that we can say Kivyachol, if such a thing were possible, that this is the month that we can console Hashem, that we can console our Father in heaven, that is suffering from the temple's absence just as much as we are, if not obviously significantly more than us, because while we are so lost and disoriented and confused that most of us don't even know what we're missing, Hashem, on the other hand, knows exactly what's missing. And the greatest tragedy is that we don't even really comprehend the tragedy of our existence. We can't imagine how beautiful the world would be if all of mankind looked at each other, and rather than seeing threats and enemies, we saw brothers and sisters, right? Each of us being made in the glorious image of Hashem. Imagine that when we saw each other, we saw a glowing soul made in the image of God, and we recognize that we have that soul too. Our minds would just be consumed with how we can bless each other and give to each other and do right by each other. But it's just so painfully opposite of what we see in the world today that it's hard to imagine such a reality. Maybe really not. I feel it in this fellowship, that there is that sense of love and goodwill and togetherness. But imagine that spreading to all of mankind. It's hard to imagine. And so while this month Av is filled with pain and sadness, I've always felt that it's it's an opportunity for us to console Hashem, to call out to Hashem from the depths of our hearts and let him know that we share his pain, that we grieve over the fact that we are distanced from each other and that we're alienated from each other, and that he isn't in that pain alone, but we're in that pain with him. This highlight was taken from the Land of Israel Fellowship. Every week, hundreds of families from literally around the world come together on our live Zoom sessions to strengthen each other, to inspire each other, and to learn Torah from the Land of Israel, in which we connect the dots between the Bible, the Hebrew language, and the confusing events of our times. Go to www.thelandofisrael.com/fellowship or click on the link below to join. Thank you.